The year was 1945. World War II had finally ended, leaving behind a world yearning for peace and rebuilding. Yet, for many colonized nations, the fight for freedom was just beginning. Indonesia, a vast archipelago under Dutch rule for centuries, boldly declared its independence. This declaration, however, came with a caveat. The Dutch East Indies, as it was then known, encompassed not only the islands that make up present-day Indonesia, but also the western half of New Guinea, known as West Papua. While Indonesia claimed West Papua as an integral part of its territory, the Dutch clung tightly to this resource-rich land. The stage was set for a clash of wills, a struggle for self-determination that would drag on for decades. The Dutch argued that West Papua was culturally and ethnically distinct from the rest of Indonesia and deserved its own path to self-determination. They pointed to the region's unique tribal societies, vastly different from the predominantly Javanese population of Indonesia. The Indonesians, however, saw this as a blatant attempt to maintain colonial control and exploit Papua's resources. They argued that West Papua was an integral part of the Indonesian archipelago, linked by history, geography, and shared destiny. The dispute over West Papua became a thorny issue in the post-war world. It highlighted the complexities of decolonization, the clash between national aspirations and colonial legacies. As both sides dug in their heels, the world watched with bated breath, wondering if this simmering tension would boil over into open conflict. The years following Indonesia's independence saw a flurry of diplomatic activity. Both Indonesia and the Netherlands sought international support for their claims over West Papua. The newly formed United Nations became a key battleground for this diplomatic tug-of-war. Indonesia, eager to assert its sovereignty over all territories claimed in its Declaration of Independence, pushed for the UN to recognize its claim over West Papua. They argued that the Dutch presence in West Papua was a remnant of colonialism and violated Indonesia's territorial integrity.
The Netherlands, however, countered that the Papuan people had the right to self-determination and should be allowed to decide their own future. The international community was divided. Many newly independent nations in Asia and Africa sympathized with Indonesia's struggle against colonialism. They saw the dispute over West Papua as a test case for the principle of self-determination and threw their weight behind Indonesia.
Western powers, however, were more cautious. While acknowledging Indonesia's claim, they also recognized the distinct cultural identity of West Papua and the need to respect the wishes of its people. Years of negotiations failed to bridge the divide. The Dutch, unwilling to relinquish control of West Papua, proposed a gradual transition to independence under UN supervision. Indonesia, however, rejected this proposal, insisting on immediate integration of West Papua into its territory. As diplomatic efforts stalled, frustration mounted on both sides, paving the way for a more confrontational approach. By the early 1960s, the situation in West Papua had reached a boiling point. The failure of diplomatic efforts, coupled with growing impatience on both sides, created a tinderbox atmosphere. The spark that ignited the conflict came in the form of covert operations and military incursions.
Indonesia, frustrated by the lack of progress in negotiations, began to support pro-independence movements within West Papua. They trained and armed Papuan guerrillas, providing them with weapons and logistical support to carry out attacks against Dutch installations.
These covert operations, while initially small-scale, served to escalate the conflict and undermine Dutch authority in the region.
The Dutch, facing increasing pressure from both the Indonesian government and Papuan insurgents, responded with military reinforcements. They deployed additional troops to West Papua, bolstering their presence in the region and attempting to quell the growing unrest. However, this show of force only served to further inflame tensions and push the two nations closer to the brink of war.
The international community watched with growing alarm as the situation in West Papua deteriorated. Calls for restraint and a peaceful resolution to the conflict fell on deaf ears. Both Indonesia and the Netherlands, locked in a battle for national pride and strategic interests, seemed determined to settle the dispute through force of arms. Section 4. Jungle Warfare, a new kind of conflict. The war for West Papua was unlike any conflict the world had seen before. Instead of traditional battlefields, The dense jungles and rugged mountains of the island became the stage for a grueling guerrilla war. Both Indonesian and Dutch forces found themselves fighting not only each other but also the unforgiving terrain.
Indonesian troops, many of whom were veterans of the Indonesian National Revolution, were adept at jungle warfare. We utilized hit-and-run tactics, ambushing Dutch patrols and disappearing into the dense undergrowth.
The Indonesian military, aware of the challenges posed by the terrain, deployed paratroopers and infiltrated small units behind enemy lines, disrupting supply lines and sowing chaos among Dutch forces.
The Dutch, accustomed to more conventional warfare, struggled to adapt to this new type of conflict. Our heavy equipment and traditional tactics proved ineffective in the dense jungles. Supply lines were stretched thin, and communication between units was hampered by the difficult terrain.
The Dutch, despite their superior firepower, found themselves on the back foot, constantly reacting to Indonesian offensives. The conflict in West Papua was not just a military one, it was also a battle for the hearts and minds of the Papuan people. Both sides sought to win over the local population, promising development and self-determination.
However, the war took a heavy toll on civilians, displacing communities, disrupting traditional ways of life, and creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty.
Section 5. The world takes notice. International reactions. As the conflict in West Papua escalated, it drew increasing attention from the international community. The Cold War, with its global power struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, cast a long shadow over the conflict. Both superpowers, eager to exert their influence, found themselves drawn into the fray.
The United States, wary of Indonesia's growing ties with the Soviet Union, found itself in a difficult position. On the one hand, we supported the principle of self-determination and recognized the distinct cultural identity of West Papua. On the other hand, we were reluctant to alienate Indonesia, a key player in Southeast Asia and a potential bulwark against the spread of communism.
The Soviet Union, eager to exploit the situation to its advantage, threw its support behind Indonesia. We provided Indonesia with military aid, including weapons and training, further escalating the conflict. We saw the conflict in West Papua as an opportunity to gain a strategic foothold in Southeast Asia and undermine Western influence in the region.
Other nations also played a role in the conflict. Australia, a close ally of the United States and concerned about the potential for instability in its northern neighbor, provided diplomatic support to the Netherlands. China, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, supported Indonesia's claim over West Papua, viewing it as a struggle against imperialism.
The international response to the conflict in West Papua was complex and often contradictory. The Cold War rivalries, coupled with the competing principles of self-determination and territorial integrity, made finding a peaceful solution all the more challenging.